Hi there, everybody. Um, Yay, we're here. There's nothing like a little tech snafu to keep you, I don't know, alive or something. Um, so, welcome, and yes, thank you, Ari. Um, you saved the day. Um, yeah, and hi, Lorena. Hi, everybody. Yes, and Janice and everyone. Um, So yeah, it's good to be back. Some of you this might be the first time seeing me since I went on retreat, and some may have been here last week. Um, and so this is Mahamudra for the people. Anybody new? So it's been a little over a year in which I've been doing this on Fridays. Teaching different texts, and the one that we're working on now is Ninth Karmapa's pointing out the Dharmakaya. And we are nearing the very end of the text. Ninth Karmapa, for those who are unfamiliar, was one well known for his composition of texts on Mahamudra. This one is the shortest one of the three main ones that he wrote. And they're very clear. And the way generally the text is presented is it starts off with a description of shamatha and then a description of vipassana, and then this kind of experience of Mahamudra, which is really the kind of like natural union of both shamatha and vipassana. So before we go any further, let's take a little moment to sit for a bit. Um, and we'll do that, and then set our intention for the afternoon. And so, depending on your practice, rely on whatever anchor or support is helpful for you, right? So, kind of the varying kinds of anchors or ways of anchoring the mind are allowing the mind to settle as we concentrate on the in-breath and out-breath, so our breathing. We can also, allow ourselves to gently hold in a physical object through our gaze or visual consciousness. We can do this with a visualized object, so physical, visualized, or mind itself. And there are others, a little tigle or a little kind of drop like right between the brow or down in the navel. So just rely on whatever feels most comfortable for you. So we most sit for about 12 minutes. Just allow yourself to relax into this moment, letting go of what came before the session. So slowly bring yourself back to this moment, this space. And allow yourself to reorient to being right here, right now. If you need to stretch, take a moment to stretch. Coffee, take a sip of coffee, whatever it is that you need right now, try and allow yourself to have. And before we go any further, let's take a moment to remember how precious this human life is. How we woke up this morning and we've had whatever kind of day we've had, but we're here together as a community, as Sangha, appreciating the ability we have to practice like this together and also individually on our own. Having gratitude for the way that wisdom arises. Appreciating the fragility of this moment. Things change. Sometimes things change very quickly, sometimes things change very dramatically. But the one thing is certain, that everything changes. Everything is impermanent. Nothing lasts. And so, in that way, how can we make the most out of this fleeting, precious moment? It doesn't have to be sad that it's impermanent, but perhaps we don't want to waste it. And taking time to just remember why it is you're here. What brings you to practice, what brings you to Bhumi Sparsha, what brings you to teachings on Mahamudra. And allow whatever that is to settle in your heart and try and allow it to bloom. Excuse me for yawning. It's been a long week. And I love teaching this class, and I'm always tired on Fridays, so it's kind of a weird combination. So last week we looked at pointing out the mind while there are appearances, and pointing out the body and mind as the same or different. So this is, this is the real kind of like juicy part, of the practice. Yes, yeah, thank you, Payne, and thank you, Karen. Jan is great relaxing. So, okay. Let's see. So, this is the last instruction, actually, before the conclusion and advice section of this text. So, I think we might be able to get through all of this today, and then pointing out the Dhammakaya will be finished. And the next time I teach, which will be actually 3 weeks from now, the next 2 weeks I'll be away. I'm sorry, 2 weeks from now. So I'm going to be away next week, and then the first week of August. So actually, the week after next, I will start a new Mahamudra text. This last instruction is called pointing out the still mind and the moving mind as same or different. And so if we can, I'd like to invite you to get comfortable and try and sit. And what I've been doing is reading the instruction and then offering some commentary. But when reading, it's it's really kind of a way to just let the text be, the teacher for you, right? Letting the text be the Lama, or letting the text be the Guru. So as I read the text, allow the sound to hit your ear, and try not to, worry too much about meaning, but just focus as much as you can on the experience that's arising in the moment. So, again, this instruction is called pointing out the still mind and the moving mind is the same or different. And Karmapa says that by looking at both the still mind and the moving mind, as done before, from those two, thought is understood to be meditation. The still mind and the moving mind are known to be nothing but the same. Their way of arising is that they alternate. At the time of stillness, there is no movement. At the time of movement, there is no stillness. Nevertheless, it is a single mind doing this. The nature of these two is nothing other than naked luminosity, emptiness. Allow yourself to just sit. It is not that one gathers thoughts and then sees them as naked luminosity, emptiness, but it is when one realizes immediately upon their arising that thoughts are naked luminosity, emptiness, that one knows the natural state of mind. This is called the falling apart of the division between stillness and movement. Mind may be still, luminous and steady and non-thought, or there may be movement of thoughts, but the essence of these thoughts is nothing other than naked luminosity, emptiness. So I'm going to pause here. This is a longer instruction, but there are several points that I want to address in this instruction thus far, and the first is this kind of the basic simplicity of this instruction. Mahamudra is typically described as so easy and so basic and so simple that it's really hard to do, right? And then the hard to do part ends up being captured in these massive books or texts of Mahamudra. I don't have one right by me, but they get quite thick. And it's all this like thick, dense writing on just resting freely, which is kind of ironic. But here the text says, the still mind and the moving mind are known to be nothing but the same. Their way of arising is that they alternate. At the time of stillness, there is no movement. At the time of movement, there is no stillness. And I frequently come across people who, especially in the beginning, tend to almost vilify thought activity, right? Thought activity is considered distraction, it's something to push against, it's something that one wants to get rid of. And what Karmapa is pointing out here is that there's no difference between the stillness and thought activity, right? It's very basic, right? So we don't need to preference one over the other. And this is really important, not preferencing anything that arises. To rest in the direct experience of stillness, to rest in the direct experience of natural movement of thought. It's easy to try and think that this is about no thought, no thinking. Of course, in a very abstract way, yes, the essence of mind is beyond thought. But it's not the absence of thought. It's not the pushing away. The same way emotion arises, right? Or physical sensation. That's not that Mahamudra is, this practice of lobotomizing ourselves. So, we feel, very little to nothing, right? Everything is just this kind of like, I don't know what. I've never been lobotomized, but probably some kind of like dullness, perhaps, right? There's not the high peaks and low valleys. And within the experience of mind and meditation, there can be peaks and valleys. And it's not the peak, not the valley to preference or to chase after or push away. It's the whole thing. It's the whole play. So it's kind of like how if you see those EKG readings, a piece of paper, and everything, the waves of the EKG printing, up and down. It's not that the peaks and valleys are the thing. It's that almost as if the paper, that's the mind, right? The ground, right? And so this is very easy, in the sense. And then the other piece is, so not preferencing the peaks and not preferencing the valleys, but also how we relate to them. Karmapa says it's not how one gathers, it's not that one gathers thoughts and then sees them as naked luminosity emptiness, but it is one realizes immediately upon their arising that thoughts are naked luminosity emptiness, that one knows the natural state of mind. This is called the falling apart of the division between stillness and movement. So again, this whole point of it not being the highs and the lows, the stillness and the movement is one thing. But then also this objectifying, this experience of, looking for the thing to then make luminosity emptiness, right? So rather than, searching for something to then kind of reify and say, oh, it's luminosity emptiness, the practice is really about just nakedly noticing what's happening. Thought activity, stillness. Thought activity, stillness. Or a blend, right? Sometimes it kind of comes in drips and drabs. And so, and I'll go on, and then, if anybody has any questions, please, you can ask a question by clicking the tab at the bottom of the screen or entering it into the chat box. Karmapa continues by saying that now when you realize that, like water and waves, all object and appearances actually do not exist as anything other than the magical tricks of mind, the pointing out that all appearances are mind has been recognized. The pointing out that all appearances are mind has been recognized. So I'll read this one more time. Now when you realize that, like water and waves, all objects and appearances actually do not exist as anything other than the magical tricks of mind, the pointing out that all appearances are mind has been recognized. And so, again, this is this kind of like stepping back from chasing after or pushing away. It's just very freely, very relaxed recognition or awareness of what's arising. And as we do this, this begins to liberate what we're experiencing. And when I say liberate what we're experiencing, what I'm getting at is that we're beginning to have direct experience with what's happening without judgment, right? Without categorizing, without anxiety. Oh my gosh, how long until I can go to sleep? Because I'm tired. And so it's like all these thoughts, right? Oh gosh, I wish I could go to sleep right now. Oh, but I have to go pick up the kids after this. All of this stuff. And it's the reactivity, right? It's all of the stuff that, right? That it's not that that's bad, right? But that reactivity arises, and really the question for our practice is, can we begin to just rest into that in that same non-judgmental way of just recognizing what's happening? Stillness, thought activity, stillness, thought activity, stillness, thought activity, with no judgment, really. It is hard not to judge the thoughts, and yet at the same time, if we could be practical about it, like, what are our choices? We can get involved in judging the thoughts, right? And if we can't do that, it's pretty clear sometimes that we're just stuck with our own kind of suffering reactivity to everything. And so this kind of like, getting back to this very basic, thing that we started with about recognizing the preciousness of this birth, right? This existence, this moment that we have. Every single moment is a moment of being able to rest directly with what's arising, right? Not the image of what's arising. And so that's, kind of like a psychotherapy kind of read on this. Like, not the kind of, sense of what's coming up, right? Thought activity, emotion, whatever. Not focusing on that as if it's, real and there, but just letting it come, letting it go. Like watching clouds, like watching kids in a playground, like watching popcorn pop. Just letting things be. And it's fascinating because sometimes our kind of, relatively like egoic positionality determines a lot of like, what kind of reacting we're doing. Like you could be listening to like the radio and there's a news segment on, and all of a sudden, there's this critical voice arising that's, oh, that's stupid, that's dumb, that's great, that's excellent, oh, that's amazing, and all of it is fine, right? But it's fascinating to stop and look at how we're reacting, why we're reacting, and what that reacting propagates, right? Because sometimes, like I came across somebody recently who was just, kind of very, you'd say like, rebellious, pushing up against, um, all sorts of things, right? And that's fine, that's great, that's something I admire, and I have those qualities in me as well. And yet, when these things arise, without awareness, it just sometimes ends up being the self-propagating behavior that creates conflict, which requires then more reaction, more pushing back, more questioning, more conflict, and it just kind of is this kind of feedback loop, right? And so allowing things to happen without judgment, and it's not that judgment is bad, right? That's the other thing. It's like not even judging judgment. It's just letting awareness be like this gigantic eyeball that just sees things. No big deal, right? In fact, how freeing is that? To give ourselves space to not judge or not react. I'm the kind of person who needs some like quiet time where I'm not talking or interacting with people, just to kind of like come back into just feeling, it's coming back to my center, I guess you could say. And I think it's a little closely related to this. It's just this kind of the beauty of not applying tremendous amounts of effort. And so sometimes, when we're new to meditation, or new to a new kind of meditation, like being perhaps new to Mahamudra, there's this desire to be, very effortful and just, treat this like some kind of calisthenics. But really, the amazing thing about these instructions, and this one is another great example of it, is the simplicity and the relaxation that's needed to be able to experience this. Like Mahamudra is not about being tight. It's not about being like our own drill sergeant. It's about being generous and kind, spacious, relaxed. It's not about goals. Oh, I better realize this much emptiness by that date. It's not about that at all. It's just about getting kind of free and loose. So the Karmapa keeps going and says, the nature of that mind, through investigating its going, abiding, and arising, is shown not to exist anywhere. When you realize that, like a horse or an elephant in a dream, it does not actually exist. The pointing out that mind is empty has been recognized. Right? So through investigating the coming, the going, whatever's happening, when you realize this, then we're able to actually recognize things for what they are, right? And so there's this example of like a horse or an elephant in a dream. It doesn't really exist, but in the dream, we're like, oh, there's a horse, there's an elephant, and try and get on one and ride it, or whatever. Right? But when we're actually able to recognize, in the dream state or in quote unquote reality, right, the non-dream state, that to recognize everything that is arising is the equivalent of recognizing the horse or the elephant in the dream state. It's a way of understanding the nature of our mind, the nature of phenomena. It's the way of understanding how kind of interconnected everything is. So Sarah writes, on the look of thoughts, one page back in my Mahamudra journal is an image of an EKG graph I drew after listening to a Mahamudra talk he gave a year ago. Instead of one line, there are many multicolored lines. This is in response to a prompt of take a picture of your mind, in your mind, of your experience of sitting in Mahamudra. That's great. That's really pretty. I'd actually like to see that one day. Thank you, Sarah. So, it's not about, I guess the point is like, it's not about the content, right? It's, as far as the practice goes, it's not about trying to control the content. It's about just observing, recognizing. Right? So all sorts of bizarre thought activity could arise, or quote unquote messed up thought activity, anger, all sorts of strong emotions. What's the big deal? It doesn't really matter what is arising, right? That's not what we're focusing on here. We're just letting it be. So why this particular instruction is really important, I think, for us Western folks, is that many people have a background to some extent in secular mindfulness, and while on one level, there's great benefit in secular mindfulness, the one kind of thing that's very limited in comparison to this is that there isn't necessarily as much of the whole acceptance of everything that can arise, right? So trying to let everything arise and just sitting with it. We don't have to worry about source. We don't have to worry about what comes next. Just letting everything come up. And so for, Lorena, it's, the emotion behind some image of me frozen on your screen, so maybe you can hear me, or maybe not, I don't know, but then just working with everything that it's arising in that moment, right? Sitting or standing or laying down or whatever it is, and just being present, relaxing into it. And this is where, so this first line of this part, the nature of that mind, through investigating its going, abiding, and arising, is not shown to exist anywhere. So this is the other thing. It's the container, where is the container? What is the nature of the container? What is the size of the container? What is the shape of the container? After doing this practice for a while, then we begin to kind of understand that the container has no edge. It has no center. Thought activity is just relative, the activity, right? Thought activity or stillness. Not only is it relatively arbitrary, but there is no difference, right? Because mind, it's the experience of mind is the whole thing. Stillness and movement are basically the same. The background is the same. Everything is the same. And this is where I think maybe, people ask about, well, like, what about good things and bad things, right? What about evil? What about murder? What about, all sorts of stuff. And, again, that is a very fascinating question, too, in relationship to all of this, because there seems to be the provocation of a certain amount of fear around letting go. Right? So it's not that we sit and do Mahamudra and become like shady people. Right? We sit and do Mahamudra and let our mind get free. Did I freeze for everybody? Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. Good, I thought I disappeared. All right. Yay. Okay. So, Karmapa goes on to say, within emptiness and brilliant luminosity, whatever arises dawns as unceasing great bliss and spontaneous presence in all its variety, like the moon reflected in water. When you realize that, the pointing out of that emptiness is spontaneous presence having been recognized. Right? So within emptiness and brilliant luminosity, whatever arises dawns as unceasing great bliss and spontaneous presence in all its variety, like the moon reflected in water. So just letting everything happen. Letting it be. It's kind of like every morning, maybe like going somewhere to look at the sky, right? And sitting, looking at the sky. I can't control the sky, right? It could be gray, it could be pink, it could be, raining, it could be hailing, and that's just what's happening, right? And all of that occurrence is totally fine. All of that occurrence is relatively spontaneous. All of that occurrence is just there. All of that occurrence is the joy and the wonder of occurrence. It's happening, right? There's a certain element of blissfulness in the sense of just deep-seated joy, deep-seated comfort, and just letting everything happen as it does. Right? Usually, when we feel the need to control or focus on, like, no, I can't, think about that, and we're trying to kind of manipulate the whole process, is when everything gets kind of, mucky. Right? And so, what does it mean to just get free and let everything arise, as spontaneous presence? And the Karmapa word in translation, the word, spontaneous presence in all of its variety. All of its variety. So not only is it everything we see, it's everything we think, it's everything we hear, it's everything we feel, it's everything we remember, it's everything we worry about. It's all of our brilliance and all of our dullness. It's all of our joy and all of our sorrow. Right? So it's this magnitude. I mean, it's basically kind of a reflection of the universe. It's just everything is possible. Yeah. The first time I went to India in 1995, I met this shopkeeper who told me, "Come into my shop. Everything is possible." And I didn't go into a shop, which maybe I regret. And so Karmapa goes on to say that within emptiness and brilliant luminosity, whatever arises. Oh, excuse me. Oh well, Lorena asks a question. You saved me from my mistake. Um, but when we're grasping for control, isn't that just unawareness that's happening also? And as soon as we remember, we just come back. No need to cry about it. Exactly. Intention to be in presence is all we can do then, right? Yeah. So, yeah. And just, sometimes even, I mean, the word intention is very good, right? Because it's kind of, it's active, right? There's a certain element of will, I guess you could say, applied. And yet, we want to even kind of go beyond intention, trying to be, spontaneous presence, right? Just letting go and being. Right? Not even having to intend, not even having to exert any effort. Just be a rock or a tree, be air, be mind. Yeah, authentic presence. Hi, Melissa. Yeah, there's no need to cry, no need to grasp. And the control we don't need. But in the beginning, there is a little bit of kind of artificial kind of holding the space or shifting, kind of like a chiropractic kind of experience of just like slight adjustment. Especially if we find ourselves kind of falling into some kind of feedback loop of reactivity that we're stuck in. So just shift. So, so Karmapa goes on to say, like the unloosening of a knot in a snake, spontaneous presence, or we could say spontaneous authentic presence itself, not departing from luminosity, insight, emptiness, spontaneous presence, simplicity, unchangingness, and great bliss is liberated immediately upon arising. When you gain certainty in that, the pointing out of that spontaneous presence is self-liberated and has been recognized. And so this beginning, metaphor of like a knot in a snake unloosening itself, so it's basically like it's like a string pulling itself apart, right? Spontaneous presence itself, not departing from luminosity. This is great. Not departing from insight, not departing from emptiness, not departing from spontaneous presence, not departing from simplicity, not departing from unchangingness, not departing from great bliss, is liberated immediately upon arising. Right? So again, it's just this kind of real basic sitting. And what we're not doing, a lot of these instructions are all not, don't. Right? But is to not change the fundamental quality of the experience, the spontaneousness, the luminosity, emptiness, the spontaneous, authentic presence, the simplicity. Simplicity. This is such a important piece. This is not complicated. The unchangingness. Right? What has changed when we're just sitting, in kind of direct experience of what's happening? What is changing? Exactly. So Karen said, I was contemplating on the Serenity Prayer through the lens of Mahamudra, rather than a gift from a monotheistic God figure. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The accepting things I can't control makes so much sense, in the sense of Or do they truly exist? Whereas I can change my attitude, choose awareness, practice mindfulness, probably practice mind. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Karen. So just letting everything go. And there's a this term I love, self-liberated. So when you gain certainty like that, pointing out that spontaneous presence is self-liberated has been recognized. So the spontaneous presence is self-liberated in that, I mean, the reality of the situation is that, like, it's liberated right now. It's liberated right now, and right now, and right now, and right now, and right now. And the thing is that, a lot of this practice is just about sitting, relaxing, giving ourselves permission to, and opening up to that self-liberated quality of mind right now, in this very moment. Like the Milarepa Guru Yoga, in this very moment, on this very seat, right now, self-liberated. There's nothing, the thing about Mahamudra is, like, there's nothing to put on top of anything, to dress it all up, make it look good or smell nice. There's nothing to take away, it's not a Rubik's Cube. There's not something you need to kind of do to it. Right? You're just letting it be. And so he goes on, this mind that is to be pointed out, just this ordinary mind that is keenly aware of one's train of rambling thoughts, is great bliss, the union of luminosity and emptiness, known as emptiness endowed with all the supreme aspects, or Mahamudra. Recognizing that is called realizing Mahamudra. Then there is nothing whatsoever to meditate upon there. Not wandering even for an instant, let insight be sharp and rest in its natural state. And so, this term ordinary mind refers to this experience of the simplicity of letting things just happen, right? Without chasing, without pushing away, without altering, without judging, just letting things come. Almost like I don't know how this can sound, but like almost like a simpleton, right? Just, we're not critical, not wondering, just watching, just being and watching. So Lorena says, then why do I feel constricted? Is my spontaneous mind asleep at the wheel? I guess it gives into the small mind sometimes. It's all good. Oh, she gives into small. Yeah. So, that kind of self-critical voice in the back that's like, why did you drink so much coffee? Like, you knew you were going to sit down and practice. Even there, like, just letting it go. Oh, now my mind is racing. Or now I feel kind of like, hyper, slightly agitated. I want to get up and move around. What's wrong with that? Where does, you could be caffeinated or you could be falling asleep. Sleep isn't bad. Being agitated isn't bad. Thinking isn't bad. All of this. So Jason asks, how do we hold our ethical principles while not judging with regards to things like murder, evil, etc.? Well, I guess my question is, like, the thought of murder can come into your mind, right? That doesn't make you a murderer. the thought of evil. Um, what I'm interested in this kind of question, is, yeah, forgive me, like I'm not insinuating that you're afraid, but there is I'm interested in the fear that sometimes lay behind this kind of questioning, right? Like, the just because we're letting things go, just because we're letting things be, right? Letting things go in the sense of just letting things come and go, right? Letting mind be. I guess that we could say that there are a couple of ways of approaching this. On one level, right, we can actively transform the mind. So whenever something, a thought that is disturbing or something arises, then we have to actively transform that to something good. So that's one thing. There's a lot of activity involved in that. There's also a lot of kind of referent into a realm of um, kind of binary good and bad, right and wrong, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with that either. Mahamudra is really about just letting the things come and go. It's a kind of like being an observer in a really crowded place, and everybody who walks by are your thoughts, your emotions, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, your anxieties, right? And so a murderer could walk by, you know, a, you know, everybody, every possible thing, if we can just let it come and go, we're not, it's not imbibing us. It's not, changing us. It's not making us that thing. The same way, like looking at a nice blue sky doesn't make us blue, right? Or like a nice, kind of peachy sunset doesn't turn us into that color. Just the existence of, thought activity coming and going in that way does not make us those things, those thoughts. But anyway, it's hopefully that's helpful. And goodbye, Janice and Lorena. This kind of on one level, this question about ethics is very personal, right? There's no one answer because we do what we need. But on another level, I want to challenge everybody to kind of look at attachment to, duality, attachment to good and bad. And what does it mean to explore these things while not letting go of reference or positionality with respect to your ethics? You can visualize oneself in the middle of a horrible war zone, right? And bodies being kind of blown to bits, and everything's violent and terrible, and the smells are intense. But that's not you, right? And so this is where it kind of gets instructions touch on, pointing out the kind of fundamental liberation of mind, right? This self-liberated quality. Everything that arises is free. So the question is, can we allow ourselves to rest into the freedom of what is arising without over-association? Yeah. Well, I mean, so Jason, I'm just going to read this out. This is helpful. I'm still just wrestling with the idea of murder as unethical people justifying wrong action. Teachings like Mahamudra, the slippery slope you refer to in your writings with regard to violence and abuse. Yeah, I mean, totally. Like, this is, I think, this is a problem. I mean, it's not a problem, right? Because this is just a pitfall of. I mean, it is a problem. Obviously, killing people is a problem, but the pitfalls of kind of experiencing and getting into this kind of direct experience of non-duality has risk, and I don't, though, at the same time want to make a big deal out of the risk, so much, because it's that also is empty. The If we can just come back to reorienting to direct experience. If we can't really control what other people will do, we can't control what other people will say. There have been plenty of people who have taken advantage of, practices that lead to an experience of non-duality, like Mahamudra, for their own benefit, for their own gain, like that, and have abused. And it's not to say we shouldn't hold people accountable at all, but at the same time, if we are to engage in practice and then be kind of worried about what the people around us are doing, again, we're falling right back into our own, cycle of suffering. And this is also not to say, like, don't have a critical lens. Like, have a critical lens, and critique yourself as well. And I mean, I think this is one very important piece, is to like look at where I may be, or we individually may be cutting ourselves I don't know, like, or behaving in a way that's inappropriate, and using Mahamudra to defend it. I just got a wave of exhaustion. But see, this is great. So, not creating any hope or fear whatsoever, hoping for the best and fearing for the worst, and resting loose and relaxed in the very nature of ordinary mind. Just at that moment, you see Mahamudra, the union of bliss and emptiness, like the center of the clear, cloudless sky. Now the goal has been accomplished. Shamatha and Vipassana have been unified, the experience and realization perfected, and you have entered the path of liberation. So, hope, not creating any hope or fear whatsoever, hoping for the best and fearing for the worst, and resting loose and relaxed in the very nature of ordinary mind, just whatever's arising. Just at that moment, you see Mahamudra, the union of bliss and emptiness, like the center of the clear, cloudless sky. Now the goal has been accomplished. Shamatha and Vipassana have been unified, the experience and realization perfected, and you have entered the path of liberation. And so again, is the importance of looking at hopes and fears. And I think that may be increasingly difficult these days because of how charged everything is, right? We're used to being traumatized all the time by, the things that come up on the news. Used to being traumatized by, daily events. We struggle with hope and fear all the time. That which we feel needs to be changed, we work on changing based on hopes. Yeah, thank you, Kay. Just what does it mean? And can we give ourselves permission? Because this really is about permission sometimes, to let go of hopes and fears and just be directly here. Let go of preferences. Let go of complex, thought activity. Again, not saying we need to be lobotomized, but also we don't need to let the complexity of everything be something we focus on either. So he goes on to say, in short, the pointing out of non-dual wisdom, free from all dualistic confusion, simplicity, great bliss, emptiness endowed with all the supreme aspects, that which is known as Mahamudra, has been recognized. It hovers above those who are devoted. It circles those who supplicate with intense longing. It descends into those whom blessings have entered. Not hidden and naturally present, it exists within you, but was not recognized before. Now that the pointing out has been recognized, you have arrived at the ground of Mahamudra. Seen in the nature of path Mahamudra and understood fruition Mahamudra. Rejoice in that. It is important that you continually and wholeheartedly make it the focus of your practice. And then he says, here the pointing out instructions and the ways of looking have been placed together separately. The pointing out instructions have been placed together in accord with the way that realization develops. If that is not done as the pointing out instructions are given all together at the beginning, you may become jaded in your familiarity with the Dharma. Then, even if they later receive instruction from others and so forth, so those are just notes for the teacher. But, it's this kind of point about avoiding an experience of jadedness or, I guess, a combination of jadedness and, kind of dryness, like this. When we know too much, especially, about Mahamudra. Mahamudra is one of these practices where the more we read, the more everything becomes very defined, and it's hard to naturally rest into what's happening. Right? And just letting kind of this ordinary experience of mind happen. Right? When we memorize all these things. And it's, again, I'm a nerd who reads all the time, and so I don't want to come off as, like, this being an anti-intellectual kind of pursuit, but at the same time, this is a little bit more artistic than intellectual. It's about, really learning how to rest loosely and freely, and you can't really learn that in a book. I know this is what is said constantly in the tradition, and it can be frustrating too because, there's a part of us that doesn't want to be accountable to anybody, so we just want the book, right? So I can just read this privately, and nobody has to tell me I'm wrong. Nobody has to tell me I'm messing up. Nobody has to tell me I'm full of shit. And yet, that's important, right? That's important to be, to get these chiropractic, kind of adjustments in resting in the view. Yeah. Permission to be in freshness. So, let's see. We've got about... I actually don't think there's several pages of the conclusion. So I actually might not finish all this because I don't want to rush. Let me see if there are any questions. Questions or concerns or anger at me for being... Let's see. The simple fact of translation problems, nature versus essence, mind versus awareness, or sun versus Rigpa, should show how necessary a human teacher is, not to say anything of the experiential side. Yeah. And, I mean, that's true. And, maybe we can also say that this whole kind of like the closeness and intimacy with a teacher, and when I say intimacy, it's about sharing Dharma, right? Sharing realization, sharing experiences is important, right? Very important. But then a lot of the stuff that we see in kind of the organized religion part of Tantric Buddhism is really not that important. That stuff, I think maybe a little bit too much has been made of it. And so when we talk about, like, the importance of having a teacher, it's not we don't need to kind of go into the kind of culty side of it. It's the same way. If you want to learn how to play the trumpet, you need to learn from somebody, and so a teacher is important if you want to learn how to play the trumpet. But it doesn't mean you need to like wear the same clothes as your trumpet teacher, or speak the same language even as your trumpet teacher, or eat the same food, or do exactly what your trumpet teacher does. And that's exactly the same thing with with this. Like, so anyway, like all of these big organizations that are very kind of power oriented, especially around the teachers. Like that stuff. The Dharma is fine, but the structure is a lot of that stuff is just extra. So Melissa says, can you say more about spontaneous presence? What does that mean to me? So spontaneous presence is this process. So I'm going to call it a process or practice of allowing ourselves to rest loosely, right? So there is an element of like physical looseness, right? Comfortable, relaxed, and just letting everything come. So letting physical sensation come. We're not provoking it. We're not pushing it. We're not, chasing it. We're not activating it. Just letting it come naturally. And then letting everything. There's no letting there be no mental reaction, right? And when I say no mental reaction, without effort. So it's a non-effortful, whole, open awareness. Open awareness in the sense that it's actually more about space than anything else. Whole, in the sense that we're not focusing on individual thoughts that happen, right? It's kind of like we're flashing the strobe light. It's like a rave of awareness, like flashing awareness. But it's not flashing, right? So we don't need to think too much of like a strobing, but this like just constant shine of awareness that interpenetrates absolutely everything that arises in the moment. Thought activity, visual experience of color, form, texture, right? And just letting that be. The spontaneity is really about there not being any kind of hard edges. It's no shape. It's not boxed in. It's not in a triangle. It's not a circle. It's not an egg-shaped thing. Right? It's just free, open, vast awareness. It's spontaneous. The presence piece is it's here. And when I say here, like I happen to be in Brooklyn. It's not just here, it's here and radiating in every single direction through time and space constantly. So that kind of presence. The spontaneous presence is just really about letting things happen freely, not altering them, not chasing them, not being at war with them, not letting like the friction of reactivity kind of like, start getting us all hot and bothered. Self-liberated in the sense that everything that arises is, as it arises, it's naturally liberated. It's just there, just experienced. I mean, I don't know if this is some like rambling thing that's not particularly interesting, but this is what my experience of spontaneous presence is like, right? And so in that space, everything that arises is perfect, and it's not perfect in the sense of like, oh, thoughts of, I don't have thoughts of murder, but like, should one arise, I'm not saying murder is perfect. but just thought activity is perfect. Thought activity is, it's just free. The same way, perfect in the sense of not like that's the most perfect thought I've ever had, but that the play is the play of perfection. It's free, it's self-liberated. There's nothing to add, nothing to take away. When we can kind of rest into that experience, then we're completely free of judgment. We're completely free of reactivity. Right? In this way, awareness becomes this thing that helps shift us out of a relationship of analysis between thoughts, analysis around thoughts, right? Judgment, preference, And so Zach writes, I'm coming from more of a Theravada Vipassana background. Could you say something about the place of concentration, shamatha, and Mahamudra practice? Yeah, so, shamatha in particular, Mahamudra is technically these two practices that come together, shamatha and vipassana. And the shamatha piece is, it's concentration in the sense of not like, laser-like concentration that is focused on kind of smallness, right? Like on one level in the beginning, it can be. So, in this tradition, when we engage in shamatha, we can use breath as a way of focusing mind. We can use, we tend to sit with our eyes open. We can use a physical object in the field of reference, and so just focusing on that. We can use a visualized object, that Buddha on top of our head, or some other kind of visualized thing. And we can then use the experience of mind itself as the anchor, or as the thing upon which we're kind of gently placing our gaze and resting into single-pointed concentration. And so that's kind of the way that shamatha arises in the practice. And the importance of it, obviously, is that without a basis of concentration, later when engaging in this practice of familiarization of the qualities of mind through vipassana, then we'll just kind of get taken right away by what's happening. We recognize like the mind is vast, and then we have that kind of flashing experience, but because we have very little kind of ability to concentrate, that we just get kind of taken off like, wow, that's so amazing, like my mind is vast, right? So the shamatha exists so that we can have like a nice, wide, stable foundation upon which to build everything else. And the shamatha naturally tends to lead towards vipassana in the sense of, us moving from very kind of, simple somatic experience like breath to, a physical object, then to a visualized object, and then to focusing on mind itself, the experience of mind. And in this particular context, it's not just thought activity, it's again, the way we tend to categorize or classify everything that we see in our visual field or hear or taste or touch or anything. And so then our specific focus is on everything that's arising in the moment. And when we're at this point of shamatha, then vipassana naturally dawns because we begin to have these direct experiences of the nature of the experience itself, of the nature of mind, if that makes sense. So you could say that that shamatha is key. It's crucial, and it shouldn't be seen just as. And I'm not saying that this is what you're saying, but just for people who get down on shamatha, sometimes it shouldn't be seen as something that's like basic and just for idiots, because it's not. It's such a powerful practice. It's and really once you've had some experience with vipassana and Mahamudra, you can't really do shamatha without kind of just like sliding down the slide of Mahamudra. It's really beautiful practice. Um, and Sarah asks, could it be perfect in the sense that it is reality, and therefore there's no other way for it to be? Exactly. Yeah, it just is. It just is. It's like there's nothing to do, and that's a good thing. Like that's a nice thing. We don't need to justify. We don't need to, unpack. We can just let it be. Yeah. So Annika writes, can you say a bit more about resting in spontaneous presence and its import when we're engaging in the ills of the social world / samsara? I think I get it. We gain more control and tap into compassion and wisdom, but wanted to check. Oh, yeah. So, like earlier today, I was at work. I was on Rikers Island, and before that, I was blessing bodies that were being buried in the Potter's Field, New York City, and both those things are intense, right? And I could find myself in the situation of just like pure reactivity, like man, like it's 5 a.m. and here I am sitting on the dock, like waiting to go to bless those bodies, and it's like, oh, now I'm on Rikers and dealing with all sorts of like complex things, like very heavily constellated around human suffering. And so one of this kind of like personal and spiritual and kind of resilience building aspects of Mahamudra is the more that we're able to let everything arise freely, right? So the dead bodies arise freely, right? The smell arises freely. The blessing of the bodies arises freely. The leaving, Heart Island arises freely. The thought activity that arises freely. The experience of light and sound arises freely. Well, we could just let it come and let it go. Right? There's less place for us to, I think you could say to some extent, like waste our energy, right? Or focus ourselves in a harmful way at things that are very difficult to control, right? And it's actually kind of that we're not able to control a lot of the things, that we experience or are witness to. We want to think that we can control a lot. Maybe we can make change, right? But to go from Heart Island then to Rikers Island, right, is to go into another really intense place. And so to practice Mahamudra while there, while driving over the bridge, while, passing through the gates. All of that is a way of, practicing directly with whatever's arising. And in this way, like there's kind of essentially no difference, especially in terms of quote unquote mechanics, between that and sitting in a field full of wildflowers or something like that. And Karen, your question is really good too. Is how does that benefit beings? Well, so we are awakening, and this process of awakening is what brings benefit, right? In that particular instance. Yeah, we can, cycle into mantra recitation. We can cycle into, activities that do bring benefit, physical benefit to beings, to communities, to space, to locations. We can, what I'm not saying is that only do Mahamudra and that's it, right? But when we are able to do this, and Payne, you're beginning to touch on it, we're kind of taking responsibility. We got one less reactive spark, right? And actually we become less of a reactive spark and we become this wide ocean that's able to hold that which is rising for ourselves, for others, right? We're very much less likely to unconsciously lash out at somebody. In fact, we're able to kind of hear people in their pain and their suffering, right? We're able to engage our own experience of trauma with spaciousness when we hear other people's pain and suffering, right? Because we're not instantly cycled right back into, traumatic reaction. Right, so there's all of this, and one of the major benefits of Mahamudra is, and this is very similar with Hatha Yoga too, is this insertion of kind of radical spaciousness. And that radical spaciousness, all of a sudden, it's not even just that the container becomes big, right? Oh, the container became big. No, the container got stretched the size of the universe like that, And when we're able to do that, that has a direct impact on space, right? So it's also kind of important to kind of remember the non-materialist part of these practices, right? So we are very kind of habituated sometimes to a very materialist kind of way of looking at things, where problems need to be solved, using a particular kind of action, activity, demonstration of action, right? But sometimes some of the most profound ways of making change is by resting into a larger experience of spontaneous presence, right? And that resting into this large experience of spontaneous presence holds everything. It changes, it's like terraforming, right? It changes the environment. And I imagine everybody here to some extent has been in the presence of somebody, right? It doesn't even have to have been like a great teacher. It could be a family member. It could be a friend whose presence just automatically kind of seems to change the way you are. I think we have somebody who's trying to sell something, and so that's really what it's about. So Kay, I'm gonna attend to Kay's question, and then we should wrap it up because I'm gonna pick up the kids in a little second. So Kay writes, I get quite stuck in my indecision. It seems nearly impossible to dip into this spontaneous presence because the stakes feel so high. Sometimes the stakes are high, but the anxiety becomes a klesha, and I don't like to act from this place where I'm over-consumed by a state of mind. How do you approach this? Just abiding in the experience. See, a real Mahamudra yogi or yogini would have left that guy's weird comments. So the question is, are the stakes high? Like, yes, they're high in the sense that, well, first of all, what if we took all the pressure of enlightenment off for a moment, and said, like, yes, we're here to liberate all sentient beings, but like, I don't need to put so much pressure on myself, right? So we could try and remove that, and when we remove that, it's not that we're removing our concern for sentient beings. That stays, right? But the weightiness of that, just try and let that melt away. The stakes are high, though, in this other way, because we are constantly reacting. Like in our dream state, we might dream of a lion, and then we're like, oh my god, I need to get away from the lion, and then we're running and we're exerting this kind of constant reactivity, and then we wake up and then we're reacting, and so the stakes are high because in the beginning especially, it is as if there is this huge mechanism of constant reactivity that we need to break, right? And all this language is only kind of temporary. It's not that we have to, in the beginning we kind of do have to shatter everything a little bit. But the practice itself is not about shattering, it's about relaxing into things as they are, with spaciousness, with kindness, and with ease, right? And so when the anxiety arises, see if you can let that rest into ease, to let go, right? And so some of that can be, what do we need to kind of address anxiety as it arises in the moment individually, right? So that could be take a bath or shower or go for a walk or lay down or, stop for a moment and read something, right? um, whatever it is that we can do in a caring way for ourselves, to not then kind of develop these habits of feeling anxious, and then, which is totally fine and normal, and then kind of negatively reinforcing who we may be as a meditator. Oh man, like I suck, kind of thing. So letting the experience arise, letting thought activity arise, letting stillness arise, letting joy arise, but letting it all arise, as if it's made of light, you know, because in a way, everything that it is arising as light, no real solidity. It can feel crazy, it can feel really real, it can feel really solid, but it's really just light happening. And part of our experience in samsara is like titrating that light quality into form, into heaviness, into density, and then all of a sudden it can feel that we're really struggling, with things that are quite heavy. Right. So if we can allow everything to be just ordinary, you know, these kinds of I think my one critique of the union of kind of social justice and something like Mahamudra is that the yes, our awakening is vital, and it's needed, and it's healing, and it's of untold benefit, and yet we need to also kind of let go of those ideas too, right? And let go of the pressure, and let go of the emergency, even though timely awakening is appreciated. Letting go of everything, letting go of our sacred cows, letting go of those things we hold most dear, to just be present. And letting go, knowing that letting go doesn't mean it will never come back. It's kind of like it's just on a long leash. Right now, it's not right here. So hopefully that's a little helpful, okay? But in any event, we're going to have to stop here. And I will finish the very conclusion of this in 2 weeks when I'm back. But for now, let's dedicate any merit from my long, exhaustive rambling and dedicate it to all beings who are today in particular are experiencing suffering because everything feels heavy and very physical and dense. May all beings be able to experience mind as light, mind as space, mind as natural liberation. Again, allowing all beings to experience this as a way of healing. Allowing this experience to move through all of these different locations where everybody is right now, East Coast, West Coast, in between, all over the world, to just expand and become as natural as our breathing, as natural as space, so that the benefit is untold, the benefit is vast. So may this be the case. May all of you experience deep realization. May you all have access to everything that you need for deep practice. May you be strong, may you be healthy, and I'll see you soon.